Hello everybody, I'm Jo Osborne, and on behalf of ODLAA I'd like to thank you very much for joining us for this extremely popular webinar on the student engagement. What do we know and how do we know it? We're very pleased to have Stefan Popenici as our guest presenter. Stefan is a practitioner, award-winning scholar and researcher with very wide international experience, an expert consultant for various international institutions such as the Fulbright Commission, and now he's working, as you can see, in the Melbourne Centre for Study of Higher Education at the University of Melbourne. Welcome, Stefan. I will make myself quiet now, and please go ahead and let me know when you want to start a Q&A session later on. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Jo, and thank you all for joining this afternoon here. I don't know what other parts of the world we are covering at this moment. I think we have a very interesting topic, and I hope we'll find a way to reach your questions, and I'm sure we'll manage to do that properly. I think it is very important to talk about student engagement, and my approach in general is to try to see what is happening in reality and what is relevant for practitioners, and I try to cover as much as I can in 1 hour. I hope I'll not go too fast through some topics, but I think it's a very complex field. So what I tried to cover today is first of all, I think student engagement is having a major problem. The current approach and what happened if you read the literature on student engagement is that if we can look at universities, to put it this way, very practical, if you look at universities today, I think we are quite far from solving the problem of student engagement. So my theory is that we have an obsolete approach, and then we need a shift in paradigm. I also want to talk about what do we know about student engagement online. We'll also go about ways to know if students are engaged online, when they are engaged online, and how this is contextualized. And then I try to look very succinctly, because we have limited time, what can we do about this? That's why I altered a bit the title of the presentation, with apologies to Jo and all, because I think it's very important to look at practical ways to engage students more. So the first part is talking about the new context for student engagement online and on campus. And I think it's important to realize that we have a big problem, and universities talk a lot about this now, about employability. And I think this is creating a new context for our students. And when we teach online, with very few exceptions, I'm currently teaching a postgraduate course. It's entirely online, and then I'm doing webinars, and then we use Blackboard as well, and different platform is WebEx. It's very interesting, and but even if my students in this course are already having jobs, I think it's visible in my courses already from the first webinar that the social and economic context is impacting a lot on what we discuss and how we approach this. So I'll go very fast through some data, because it is interesting to see that across the world, graduates have a very different perspective ahead of them when they get out of universities. When they graduate, their diplomas do not secure, as it did in the past, the sure key for a better future. In the United States, graduate unemployment, this is a very interesting research that was published in 2016. From 2010 to 2012, underemployment, that is a very interesting statistic that is very hard to find. But according to this research, for graduates, it stands at as high as 50%. I think it's absolutely spectacular to just to imagine that half of your cohort is in jobs that do not require a diploma, jobs that do not pay very well, are traditionally poorly paid. In the UK, a big company specialized in student loans, Future Finance, and Future Finance in 2016 applied a questionnaire with 2,050 students. So it's quite a good sample. And what they found is that over half of all students across the UK do not consider that their studies, university studies, will secure them a graduate level job. So the future looks quite bleak for half of students in the UK, according to them. This is the perception. But this matters because this impacts on how students engage online and then how they engage on campus. In general, this is, if you read about motivation for learning, a topic that I find very interesting, is it's not only very complex, but it's also very relevant for student engagement online and on campus. Just to take another example, there are two different sources for China. There is an unprecedented number of jobless graduates. And for the last years, according to Michael's Institute, we see a constant decline in the number of graduates who are able to find a full-time job. And also in Australia, because we have so many participants from Australia, I think 99% today, we all know that student debt is growing. The employment market is very tough for graduates, and unemployment and underemployment, according to Grattan Institute or Graduate Careers Australia, all their data indicate that graduates have a tough time. So this creates a different picture for students. And then if you make an exercise of imagination, just step back and think that you're a student, and then in your undergraduate years, and then you see in your own communities with your own friends, with people that they went to university and they struggle, they don't find a job. I think this impacts on the whole way to approach what is happening in universities. And also very interesting data that was just released by Fed in just a couple of months ago in the United States. And this data, in my opinion, does not get enough visibility, an honest discussion about what is happening now with universities, and then what are the real implications of this. But what Fed is saying is that it's easier now to find in the United States non-college jobs than college jobs. So if you have a diploma, actually it's harder to find a job. And then as an anecdote, I use a lot of that, and then usually I avoid anecdotes, but I know students in Australia that had to apply CVs without their real degrees. So they dumb down the CV to find a job, and then this is the reality now. And again, I think this is very important to keep in mind when we deal with our students. That is a very it's not only a very tough time, but it's also a different reality. The massification of higher education comes with a very different context for in terms of opportunity and job possibilities for employment possibilities for students. And it is important to look at what do we know about student engagement online. Well, in very few words, we can say that we don't know a lot. And first, if we look at the way that I mentioned at the very beginning, that we are going to talk, that the old and current theoretical frameworks look at student engagement from an institutional perspective. And specifically, we talk about, if you read literature in this field, you realize that most of these studies talk about fixing students. What is wrong with students that are not able to graduate? How do we fix them? How do we engage them better? And then many times, to be honest, I read these studies and I miss the point that is the institution and then this graduation and the ideal scenario good jobs. But in between, we talk about real people. And then this point is missed in many studies. It's real people with real emotions, with complex lives. And then this is very important. And then from students' perspective, is sometimes irrelevant if they are fixed or not, because they deal with real challenges in the real life. For them, it's much easier. What are institutions able to offer in terms of quality education, a fair deal in their studies, and in terms of opportunities? So I think a change in paradigm, I would look at how this problem of student engagement makes sense from a student perspective. It's very important, and then it's a long discussion about that. I'm talking, and I'm working with a colleague at Melbourne Centre for the Study of Higher Education, my Professor Henish, on a study about this, and how it is possible to rethink the paradigm of student engagement in general. You already know that employability, and I mentioned at the very beginning when I said what I'm going to cover, that employability is very much on top of the agenda for many universities. And I think employability cannot be, this is my personal perspective, and I was writing recently on the Conversation, an article about this, that employability cannot be taken out of in abstract terms, or out of the whole context of socio-economic context, social fabric, what is happening in students' lives. And then just to look at one problem, it is, I think, is, at least, let's put it this way, is disingenuous when we talk about higher education being the most casualized industry. Was a couple of years ago that was this data was made public by Australian media. Now, in Australia, for instance, higher education is the most casualized industry after catering. So you know that the percentage of sessional staff, people that are hired by the hour, is increasing exponentially every year. And we tell our students how employment looks like, and then we promise our students that we have the wisdom, we can share our wisdom how to secure good jobs. When our colleagues in universities do not have these good jobs, I think it's not very realistic, to put it bluntly. Students often looked at us, and I have a PhD student that recently asked me if it's realistic to even consider an academic career, because and that was the painful part, because looking around what is happening in universities, it's not very encouraging. So I think, again, this is changing a bit the whole discussion about engagement in higher education and how we deal with employability and what stands. But talking specifically about student engagement online and narrowing down on what do we know, I think the most important source of evidence and data is student satisfaction surveys. It was a recent study released, and then countries like UK, United States, is over 90% of universities applying student satisfaction surveys. And then this is the main source of evidence. If students are satisfied and how happy they are with the course, this is the main source of data. But I think it's important to hear our students, but I don't think it's perfect, and it's far from perfect, and I think it's insufficient, and then I'll explain why. We also look at attrition rates, so we look at numbers, how many students are able to graduate, and then that's another bit of indicators, source of indicators that is interesting. We talk about learning analytics. We have we can measure interactivity in terms of student content. How many, very crude example is student content interaction, number of clicks, how many times they read or looked at what we post online. We have student interaction. We look at discussion groups, and then we have student-teacher interaction, and then this was summarized very well in the paper that you can see below if you're interested to read more. I think this is giving, again, learning analytics is promising a lot. It's not giving that much, because if you do this in practice, you know that learning analytics is like, many times, unfortunately, in our practice, is like the algorithm used by Google. We know that it's there. We have very little access on what is really interesting and possible using learning analytics. It's just one minor fraction, basically what is available in the platform we use, Moodle or Blackboard, whatever technological solution the university is using. And we can also look at learner outcomes, and then this is, in few words, grades, scores, what grades students get. Again, if you look at all this, I think we need more nuanced sources of data and much more in-depth analysis of how students engage online, because and then to give you an example, I'll give you the student satisfaction surveys. I looked at this because it's the most used, and many times academics are careers are determined by student satisfaction, if students are satisfied or not. And I find this very interesting, because if you read the literature, because universities are now fortunately in the era of evidence-based decisions and we can and database decisions. We have to look at data to see, and research to see what research and data is saying about student satisfaction surveys. And the research reveals that basically they're badly biased, and students in general have different problems with using this, and when they complete this, research found that statistically significant percentages go against female instructors. So just the gender is determining if you get a good. It's not fair, and it's not. But this is happening, and then there are various studies showing this gender bias in evaluating teacher quality and student engagement. It's also determined by the discipline, and grade expectations are more significant than teaching effectiveness. So how this works is that if students expect a certain average, if they imagine, let's say that is going to be an easy course or a difficult course, but with a certain average of grades, and then they expect that if that grade is not achieved, the way teaching went is not that relevant. So it impacts a lot. I think if you look at only these three, it's already interesting to see that we have to take student evaluations of teaching with a pinch of salt. And also, just to go very fast through this, there is the impact of some variables that are not related at all with student engagement, and it shouldn't be related at all with student engagement or the quality of teaching. And then one negative relationship between brand attachment strength and student satisfaction. When students are not attached, do not care about the institution, the tendency is to give higher scores when they feel like part of the culture, part of the brand, they tend to be much more critical and expect more, and they give lower scores. And then this impacts is also very, very interesting how this works. Physical attractiveness, if you look in a certain way, impacts on this. I said gender, grades, course content, if it's mandatory or elective, if expectations are sorry, I try to read in the same time comments. I shouldn't do that, but and then there are many other variables that are not connected a lot. And then empirical findings cast a serious doubt on the validity of students' evaluations of professors as measures of teaching quality or effort or student engagement in what we and then students should care about. As these researchers put it, evaluations respond to meteorological conditions, and so I think that's not the perfect or the ultimate source of indicators. And if we look at student feedback, as I said, is still very important. I always read with what I'm far from saying that we shouldn't have student evaluations. I think they're very important. I don't think they're the ultimate instrument, or it should be the only one. And I also argue that it's having too much weight in the way we measure student engagement and teaching quality. But if we look at student engagement, and then I looked at different surveys and then results, and then one example is from this university in Canada. I used to teach in Canada. I know that the system of higher education there, and it's very important to think about is if the course curriculum is well organized and then a clear learning outcomes, and then students know exactly what to expect. If standards and then general requirements are clear and well presented, the structure of the course is sound and then organized in manageable modules that help students, and then content is well selected. It's relevant, up to date, easy to access, and all these resources are there. We don't ask students to read things that are irrelevant or hard to find. In terms of teaching, it is important when students get the sense that it's fair and then grading is consistent, in line with learning outcomes, and then this is clear how it goes with marked assignments and exams. It's clear and meaningful feedback, and I think it's very important to look at what students do online. For me, this is a very important. We talk about a lot, and I'm going to mention this later on, but we talk a lot about big data in student engagement and measuring student engagement. Recently, you talk about small data, and for me, they're both very important. And then when you look at what students mention online, if your class is not thousands of students, if it's not a MOOC, but if you have a manageable course and a relatively manageable, it's not hundreds of thousands, as I said, you can look through what students post and you immediately see how the course goes. It's important to stay connected as much as you can with that, and then look at students' participation online. It is important to understand. That's why I opened with a socio-economic context, because students' motivation determines, and this is what literature shows, that engagement in online courses is determined by a lot about this. It's a recent book on student motivation in online courses, and if regulations do not make sense, and then you overdo this, like deadlines, directives, compliance requirements, and so on. This is, in general, you undermine motivation. It is important to have convener support, peer support, to create in the online environment the kind of place, the community that is not only familiar, but every student feels safe. So it is important also to deal with minor incidents if something inappropriate is happening or a comment is hurting someone and so on. So it's important to look at how you manage this in terms of not only course design, but how you manage this for engagement within web-based courses. And literature reflects also that teachers should focus on increasing students' autonomy, online collaborations, and in providing support. Not only directly, as I mentioned before, it's important to create networks of support, to design tasks that are able to help students create a community that is supportive, and peers can help if one of members of the group struggles. Discussion groups are very important in this. We've reached the point to see how do we know if students are engaged online, and as I said, student surveys, again, this is the most important source of evidence. But even if we know, we read this and then we find out, what I found in practice and then what is sometimes touched in the literature is that it's not really wise to wait for student evaluations of teaching. Usually these come after you finish the course. So you use this and then sometimes it's too late. You can learn for the next course, but students in Europe that already finished do not benefit a lot. So I think it's important to look at other sources of evidence, like a level of students' interaction with content and with peers, see what's happening in discussion groups, and then also try to encourage a communication with a convener or with the conveners of the course. It's also important, in general, if you manage to engage students, and what I found is always that when students feel that it's meaningful and it's important for them, the quality of students' work is increasing. So that's a pretty good indicator for me. Every time students put an extra effort, and then you can see immediately the quality of their work changing, and as a steep curve in terms of academic work and the quality of what they're doing. You have also learning analytics. Again, it would be wonderful to have a bit more of that, because I read a lot of studies, but I don't see much in practice. So I don't see a lot happening in terms of how teachers in their teaching use learning analytics and predictive analytics and all these wonderful instruments that we have in our hands. I've heard someone saying recently that now that we have also all this data, we have all the answers, and an expert in the field, very, very much connected with Coursera. And we have all this data, he was saying, so we have all the answers. We just don't have the questions. And I strongly disagree with that. I think I was very surprised to hear that, because first of all, we don't have the answers. I think many questions are not asked, even though these questions are quite visible, and then it's very curious that universities are so shy to ask important questions about the use of data, about the privacy, about ethical use of data, about ethical implications, about so many questions that are unanswered. And in terms of we have all the answers, I really doubt. One of the answers that we don't have, to give you a practical example, is how we have an in-depth and a comprehensive understanding of what student engagement in online environments is in our everyday teaching. I think that's still, and then I read a lot on this topic recently, you don't find in the literature this answer fixed by the volume of data that we have in our hands. So I think it's very important to look with academic skepticism at this kind of statements in terms of data and sources of evidence, because sometimes it's very promises are very high and reality is not. But we have to go to the part where I said that I try to put a bit of focus on what can we do about students' engagement online, because this is what I look at all these studies and vast literature. There are entire journals devoted to this, and we can read a lot. What some articles reveal is not that spectacular anyway, but what can we do about student engagement online is very important, because again, going back to what students have when they graduate, I think it's what is happening in our courses can make the difference between success and or failure on long term. So I think it's crucial. The first thing that we can say is that the one-size-fits-all approach does not work. And then, unfortunately, there are many authors saying that this is what is working in student engagement. And then I don't think this is realistic. More is like a long-term, very complex set of efforts that are non-linear and very dependent on the context. And there are different levels of variables and the impact that can change student engagement, and they're not always aligned or in the teacher's hand. I'm not saying it should be this way, but sometimes it's not that simple. You have the institutional level with the policy design, with internal quality assurance systems, and grade inflation is one of the small problems that we can mention here. And then you have MANT, and then you have a focus on teaching and learning. The way that management can influence this is very, very important. We can think about managerialism and about the real focus on teaching and learning, and then what is the difference between rhetoric and the reality if a university is focused on income generated by research, or is really interested in the quality of student teaching. There are some, I'm sure you're all familiar with some studies that undermined the optimism that is shared by many scholars, and I'm thinking about Academically Adrift in the United States, that showed that in terms of student engagement or internal quality assurance, things are far from perfect. And what they say, basically, just a fast reminder, is that half of the students they did the study across all higher education in the United States, and then they say close to 50% students basically do not learn basic literacy and critical thinking, do not gain critical thinking skills after 3 years of study. They later, years later, they published Adults Adrift, looking at the same cohort, and they found that the same percentage couldn't find jobs, and then they basically joined that massive percentage of underemployed students. So I think the focus on teaching and learning and then what is happening in reality is very important. You have the program and the course subject level, depends what you call it in your institution. And then it depends very much on curriculum design. As I said, if you have clear learning outcomes, assessment is sound. It's not, over assessment is killing it sometimes. I looked at many courses, and then you have a common error that we should avoid is to realize that many assessments do not make for a formative assessment. Sometimes you see this in practice. So focus on content delivery that is well organized and technological solutions that are up to date, very, very important. And then sometimes the technological solutions are not really what students use or what they are used to when they use their gadgets. And we talk about the a generation that is very familiar with new technologies, and then sometimes universities do not keep up with that. So I think that's also impacting. And then at the student level, you have motivation for learning and sometimes study skills that are not always aligned with the requirements of the course, and this can impact. And then remedial. I hate this, but this is what is called still in higher education across the world. Remedial measures are required, but when study skills are not there, this can impact significantly in terms of engagement and motivation for learning. And teaching for engagement in online courses is important. It is important to engage with students and their interest, and then that's why I said in my previous slides that is important to think about what is interesting for students, and it's very important to open the communication with your students and make create a safe environment where students can say, well, actually, I'm interested in this, and then how is this connected with this, and then I think what we need here is the courage to approach very difficult topics that can be and then very important topics as that are. The example can be used in the slide before. If over half of students think that their studies basically do not give them a better future, I think that's a pretty big topic to discuss, and then it's rarely discussed. I may be wrong. I don't know any study, but in my practice, I've rarely seen academics talking about this. So what is important and then what is interesting for students is crucial in creating the engagement for, especially online. It is important to focus on content and the relevance of the content and explain why was that selected. I think it's not required or important for students to get an extensive presentation on this, but just to say whatever you teach, this is why it's important to study that. And then I think this is it's important because we talk about lifelong learning, and I strongly believe that if you create the curiosity and then you put the emphasis in the relevance of what you're doing in teaching online and on campus, students will go on their own. And that's the best thing. You create the independence in learning, and then you steer the curiosity, and then this is happening. You have to have from the very beginning clear expectations and present that. Then this is about being fair. Reference to learning outcomes. This is the intended learning outcomes. This is what I want to achieve, and this is the standard in terms of marks. Students care about marks, and I don't think it's wrong. And I think we teach students to learn for marks since they're in kindergarten, and then especially in some systems of higher education. And it's natural to care about marks. They determine so many things, and that's why learning outcomes present a clear map of this is where you have to be as a student when you go to the exam. And then you'll pass on, and then you'll get a good mark if you do this and that, and then that's relevant for students to know where they have to go. This is about fair and consistent grading of assignments and exams, and then small marks, that small mark tasks. It is relevant to emphasize that it's fair and it's clear, and then what is relevant and what matters in terms of assessment was presented, and you take away the uncertainty and fear, so students can focus on what is important in learning, rather than wondering what is going to happen. Clear and meaningful feedback is important, and it's important to give feedback on student participation and on assignments. Write as much as you can on this is what I try to do all the time, and this is what literature shows, that engaging often with students in discussion boards, emails, and then what other forms of communication, it really works and it helps them. And it's also creating the confidence that is important for students to create a sense of being there, being in your online community. And then this is ultimately work to make the course stimulating and interesting. And then one of the main risks for me is this boredom. When you see that a topic is not, the first question I ask myself as a practitioner is if that discussion topic is not poorly designed, what can I do to make it more interesting? Because boredom is killing it, and this is very easy to reach in online environments. Self-centered teaching is that sometimes we love our topic, and then we love what we do as teachers, and then we know why it's important. It may not be that clear for our students, so it's important to move the center to students, and then start from the idea that it may be clear for you, it's not that clear why the students should join that. Sometimes the focus is on gadgets or formal processes or different fads, and I think what is important, and it sounds like common sense, but it's often important to focus on gadgets, to avoid focusing on gadgets, but focus on learning. And it is important to fine-tune approaches. What is engaging? And I said, when is this happening? It's important, because what is interesting and engaging for an undergraduate student may not be relevant for a postgraduate student. So when I said it's a complex reality student engagement, and one size does not fit all, that's a perfect example. Engagement in online environments cannot be considered as a linear process, and then this is what you have to follow 3 steps, and then this is what will bring success. Teachers can learn from students, peers, and literature on how, and then this is an ongoing process. It is important to know how to use technology. Sometimes this is a big hurdle for some who teach. Open communication with students, and it is important again to nurture active learning and curiosity. I said that, but the use of technology, I think, and this is what I mentioned before, is opening now almost unprecedented possibilities, and the risk is that we use just one side. It's big data. We have learning analytics. We have predictive analytics that can provide solutions and select and look at, not only find patterns that can inform decision making for student success, but also create the bespoke solutions for personalized education, and you can use technology to give that. Because I plan to keep 10 minutes at the end, is 1:48. I can reach some conclusions. First of all, student engagement in online environments is a complex, multidimensional, and contextualized process. It depends very much on what is happening in students' lives, what is happening in your institutions, and then it depends on a variety of factors that can make or break this. The second point is that all these contextual factors, social, economic, cultural, determine student engagement in all learning environments, in campus and online. And I think it's important to, when we think about what I said about student engagement and the tendency to forget that in between the theory and dry data and theoretical approaches about what institutions can do better, or how institutions do this properly, and then how students are fixed, and then graduation rates, and then in between we talk about human beings, and then that amazingly is sometimes missed by the whole process of thinking about student engagement in campus and online. And the last point, I love technology. I'm using technology in my daily life in many ways, at home, and then in teaching and in my professional life. But this is not motivating. One of the examples that I may irritate some, and I hope some will be irritated by or provoked by this thought about technology. Think about when MOOCs came. What was the promise of that? That with MOOCs, we open education to all, is democratization of education is solved. Every child around the world can take a Harvard degree. That's absurd. And I think people saying that never lived in a poor community or visited more than an hour a poor community to realize the kind of complex challenges that students face in different environments. And in the same vein, I think it's important to realize that technology is not the solution for student motivation or for student engagement. Is the medium. Technology is giving us fantastic new possibilities, but it depends on us to make and create the complex web of ideas and solutions and bespoke, nuanced approaches for certain challenges to make it motivating, and then to use technology to create that learning community that is helping students to flourish. So it is important to rethink student engagement in a more comprehensive, human and student-centered paradigm, beyond slogans and beyond fads. I think ultimately that without any value judgment on fads, the fact is that they exist and then sometimes do not help. So, thank you. This was my presentation, and now I would love to hear questions or read questions, I guess.
Thank you very much, Stefan. That was, I know I'm going to be the first person to listen to the recording again. It was so complex. There is no magic bullet. I think that's the answer, isn't it? I mean, we look for one all the time. It's not just there's not a magic bullet for the answer, but there doesn't seem to be a magic bullet for the question either. Yes, we can accept questions by people if they wish to type into the chat. But if anybody would like to speak, also they like to put their hand up, then I can enable their microphone if they would like to do that. But if you like, while people are thinking about that, we've just had a very long statement put in there from Elaine. If you like to look in the chat, And that's a question to start you off.
First of all, yes, thank you very much, Joe. And in terms of magic bullet, I think that's the lazy solution.
Oh.
I think it is very easy to get away with that. You present a list of things, and you say that's what it, this is how we know it, and then this is how you do it. But I don't think it's honest. And then ultimately, we all join education not to get rich. I don't think that's the main motivation we've got. And so I think we still believe, and that's the part of idealism we all have in our work, that we still hope to give students a better future, isn't it? And improve our societies, and avoid the kind of nonsense that is happening around the world now. Just read the news this morning about Trump and then what is happening in the world. So we have big challenges ahead. I think it's important to stay alert and be honest about that. I really value your comment, and yeah, there is no magic bullet. I'm reading now the comment from Elaine. What about delivery? Teachers have different ways of explaining concepts, and some are not good at aligning the knowledge to the correct level of students. And I think that's a very astute comment. And that's why I said it's important to have the curriculum aligned. You have learning outcomes, and then you have assessment aligned, and then concepts aligned with this. But Elaine is continuing saying, obviously you have to push students to understand complex matters, but it's often not done well. Again, I agree. But of course, you have students with different abilities. Being able to teach to these differences is a skill. Is there any literature on whether this impacts on students? Yes, and in my presentation, Elaine, I hope you can hear me. It's a huge volume of literature in this, and I'm happy. At the end of my presentation, actually, you have my email address, and I'll be happy if you want, I can send you more. But during my presentation, I put some work that I cited in small letters. So, but you can read it if you look at it. I can also send you more. So, yes. It is. I am familiar with literature on this and on how this impacts specifically on online education. Thank you, Dan. Also, more comments about how to nurture active learning and curiosity. Oh, Dan, I don't know what I did to upset you so much, but I think you asked me a question that will take me another hour. It is another I think is a very complex question, and I think it's a very complex endeavor to steer their curiosity and how to create an active learning. In few words, and I apologize for being so simplistic with this, but we don't have time. I think it's important to read students' imagination, just fire up their imagination, and then just make sense and how they think and how they can look at their future and what matters for their own development and I think if you to use a very simple example, I think other industries are doing this fantastically well. Gaming industry, Hollywood is using this. They touch on imagination. They don't touch on abstract stuff and theoretical approaches how to fix people. I think they talk with their imagination and how to capture their imagination in that. And again, Dan, if I can, I'll be more than happy to communicate more if you'd like. Of course, you have now my email address on the screen, and then thanks, Sharon, for sharing that. Jennifer is asking if we can get a copy of the slides too. Joe, I think that's I don't know what should I do about this.
No, that's all right. I'll liaise with you. That's all right.
Yes,
If
yeah,
you're
I'm
happy
happy
with
to share
that,
it.
then we can organise that too.
Yes, and Sheridan is yes, and then I love this comment that part of firing up students' imagination begins with listening to students, and I fully agree with that. And then actually, Sheridan puts this much better than I was able to put it now. I'm usually very focused to stay on time. That's why I try to go fast through this last part. And if there are no other questions, and
can I ask you? Thank you very much for that, Stefan, and congratulations on hitting the time mark, which is very good indeed. As I said, I don't mind continuing beyond, but I think we've got plenty to think about there. But if you wouldn't mind, if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing your screen, I just have a final screen that I would like to share.
oh yes,
I
absolutely.
can manage to do that.
Yes. So share files.
Yeah, I know. We have to talk our way through this, don't we?
Yes, I think I've done this.
Oh, no, yes, all right. Wait a minute, I didn't go to the right one. I shall just have to do it a different way now because there was I going to be so organised about it, but I actually opened a different version of it, and now I can't see.
I think I stopped sharing my
Yes,
slides.
you're
Again,
fine. You're fine. I'm not. Forgive me, people, because it's yeah, I didn't do the right way.
But I'm the slides just to.
Yeah, look, there we go. Look, I'm sorry. It's yeah, you've got the wrong version of it because I've only got one screen. But I would like to finish off by, apart from thanking everybody and all the participants to join in, I did end up releasing the joining information to everybody who had asked for it, since as inevitably would happen, we only had about half the people who'd originally registered turn up on the day, but we've had over 50 people join in, and I think it was fascinating. Could I please just note to everybody, please, if you may be interested in the upcoming ODLAA conference, which will be coming up in February in Melbourne. And I know we're going to be inviting Stefan, if he is available, to come along and run a session there. But we'll be talking about that later. I'm not holding you to it yet, Stefan. So please take down the note, and you can see that abstract submissions are open and registration will probably be commencing next month. So if you just take down a note of that, then you can keep an eye on it, everybody, for the upcoming conference. With that, I thank everybody who's left in the room. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to you too, Stefan.
Thank you,
At
Jo.
this point, I will stop the recording.